Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Welcome to the Swift tutorial on Alamofire and SwiftyJSON. These are very popular third-party frameworks that make it easier to do HTTP requests as opposed to using like URL session and JSON serialization, which is built into Xcode. So you can use either one. Working on actually a video comparing the two, so keep an eye out for that. Now, without further ado, let's go over how we're going to make this happen. And so it's a four-step process. You're going to sign up with RapidAPI and Pastebin to get the API keys that you need to pass in. So anytime or most of the time, you know, there's some APIs out there that you don't need a key for. But for these, we're going to use a key just to show you how that process works with parameters, headers, etc. And we're going to add SwiftyJSON and Alamofire to your project through Cocoapods, which if you're not familiar with Cocoapods, I'll give you a little show you how to install it in your terminal. So it's terminal stuff, but it's really simple. And we're going to do HTTP GET requests and POST requests. All right. So first thing, of course, is to create these accounts at Pastebin and at RapidAPI. So as you can see here, go to pastebin.com, see that I already have an account. You can go up there and go through like the whole sign up. I think there's like a login sign up button. I mean, I'm sure you guys have signed up for things before. it can make that happen. And then here in the API is where the key that I'm talking about is going to be when you click this API thing. And so my key is right here. Your key will be here as well. It is blurred out so that you can't take it and, you know, screw up my API account. Because that's how it uses your key to track usage. So Pastebin is pretty user-friendly with this, where they're not going to like charge you for pasting a lot. But something like if you were using like a weather API that they, you know, cost them a lot of money to use, you know, you get that API key and you can really run up a tab for somebody. So Pastebin and then RapidAPI.com. And then for this one, you of course, you know, you sign up here. Go into my saved APIs. This is for me. I've saved it. This is the one that we're going to use. It's the Norris API. And again, your key will be right here in this little area. Everything you need is in this area. RapidAPI makes it pretty easy, but they only have Objective-C here, which presents a nice challenge for us, and I'm kind of thankful for, because it lets us, you know, do this our own way. Alright, so hopefully you've got your RapidAPI account. You see the Chuck Norris page and the Pastebin page. So let's get going. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add SwiftyJSON and Alamofire to our project via Cocoapods. Now, in order to get this project, here, let me open up the window here. So this is my GitHub, and you want to go into Alamo. The link is in the description, and you want to branch to starter, and you want to download the zip. You want to download the zip file because if you open an Xcode, it clones the whole project with the Cocoapods already installed, and it's kind of weird, like it's finicky. So if you just download the starter project, here it is in my downloads folder. put it on my desktop. And there it is. So now let's add Cocoapods, and we're in the terminal. And let me make this font bigger. Yeah, so you guys can see what's going on here. We want to cd into, which means go into a folder basically. So we want to cd into, and I drag the location. It's easier than typing the whole thing in, you know. And now we're in Alamo Starter. And in here we're going to type pod init. And that's going to create a pod file. If you don't have Cocoapods, this is important, you cannot do pod init. In order to do this, you have to type in sudo gem install Cocoapods. And it's going to ask for your password, because you use sudo. And so this takes a while. I already have mine installed, so it didn't. But yeah, so you're going to sudo gem install Cocoapods, and then you're going to do pod init. And so what it does in your project when you do that is it creates this pod file. Now, now that we have this pod file, we'll open it up, see what it's about. In here, you can kind of see, again, this text is so small. In here you can kind of see what we're doing. See platform iOS 9.0, which is pretty old. Most people, so the hashtags are, or what is it, #, if you're an old school phone guy or gal. The comments are with the hashtags. So if you delete that, it's going to make it part of the code. It's the same as like the double, like that in Swift is the same as a hashtag in what we're using right now. So let's, I mean, what are we on, iOS 13 now? Almost? Yeah. Let's just do 10. And then pods for Alamo, we're going to put down here, we're going to put pod, don't want to capitalize. This is the problem with using text edit. I usually, you know, I like to use anything else. It's like code editors like Xcode or Atom. If you're running this and it's not able to understand what pods you're using, you might want to switch from a text editor, because the way the characters work, sometimes it can be weird. So you might want to use an IDE instead of a text editor. But this one works. This one works fine. The text edit in OS. So we're going to say pod SwiftyJSON and pod. Again, that capitalization, not going to fly. Pod Alamofire. So we have these two. They have to be spelled exactly correct. You know, you don't have the autocomplete like in Xcode. So, yeah. And we're going to save that file, close that file. And while we're still in this folder, we want to run pod install. Here we go. As it says here, close any current Xcode sessions and use Alamo Xcode Workspace for this project. So let's go back into our folder so we can see what it's talking about. And in here you're going to see where there once was nothing is the pod file lock, pods, and Xcode Workspace. This is what you're going to have to run your project with from now on. Instead of don't click the Xcode project, you want to do Xcode Workspace. So let's open up the Xcode Workspace. And always when I install new Cocoapods, I like to product build, just to get everything talking to each other. And as you will see in, if you open up the main storyboard, you can see that I've already built a little shell that we're going to use for things. It's just, there's two different views here. One is for the posting to Pastebin, and one is for getting the Chuck Norris quote. And then in the view controller, you can see where I've created a Chuck label and a Pastebin text field outlet for those two, for these two things here. Let's open it up side by side just so. And for this is an IB action that's linked to this button, and this is an IB action that's linked to this button. So pretty basic stuff there. And we're going to start adding our functionality right now. And in the view controller, I'm going to go up, I'm going to import Alamofire, import SwiftyJSON. And again, we're going to build succeeded. Everything's looking good. And so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create constants for the URL as we get started in this GET request here. Create a constant for the URL, and we're going to create a constant for the API key, both of which we need in order to make the request. And yeah, so the API key we can get from, let's see, if we go, for this one we're using the RapidAPI. So the API key is right here, and just click, copy, paste. And then for the URL, we do the same thing. This would be the URL. Well, actually, because we're getting the random jokes, this is the URL for the whole page. So what we want to do is, you see over here where it says /jokes/random, that is what we need. That's all we're asking, is just the random jokes off of the API. So we're going to go into here, and now we're going to make our request. Alamofire, and for some reason it doesn't. Yeah, here we go. Now see, you want to pick the one with the most, with all of these inputs. So with the URL, of course it's going to be URL. Method is going to be get. But what do these other things mean? So we're not going to use encoding for now. But if you do need to, there's plenty of resources in Alamofire's documentation, which can be found on their GitHub. So let me just, kind of jumping around, but let me just pull that up. So here, Alamofire's GitHub, they have their documentation, and usage is probably, that's, most people are going to go into the usage, and everything you need is going to be right there. So anytime you have some questions, it's very well documented. So keep that in mind. And yeah, let's get rid of that. So And what they want us to pass in the API key, if you see, let's pull up the, it says header parameters. So they want you to pass it in as a header. So some, like the Pastebin that we're about to use, is passed in as parameters. This one wants it passed in as headers. They're two separate things that do very similar things. So for headers, we want to pass it in a way that the API can understand. And here in the documentation, it says x-rapidapi-key. This is what it's called when we're sending our request in. So we want to take that and we want to make a dictionary. We're going to make a string dictionary. And the first string is going to be that x-rapidapi key. So just to repeat myself, it knows what is coming in, and it puts it in a way that the API, the website, can understand. And of course the key is the one that we put in up here. So we're going to say API key, and then we're going to pass in the header. So now once we send it in, it should understand and work, but we're going to have responses, and for this we're going to use response.json. And if you press enter to autocomplete response.json and then press enter again, it will take you into the completion handler, which, if you're not familiar with closures or completion handlers, just Google it, check it out in Swift. It's a very Swifty feature that's used quite a bit. So it's good to know. Now, you can put whatever you want there. I put response, it's easier to understand. And so this is what, this is handling the response. So we want to, first off, make sure it worked. So if response.result.isSuccess, which is a bool, so we can just start the brackets there. So that's if this is true. And we're going to print, I'm going to say, got it. Chuck Norris is in the building. Great. And then we're going to have an else clause that is print Alamofire error. And then to display the error, we're going to do response.result.error, which is in the form of error. So, yep, this is, we're going to say string describing to turn it into a string. And you know what? Let's go ahead and build and run here and see how this is working. Now when we click get quote, it's printing, got it, Chuck Norris is in the building. So give yourself a pat on the back. Now what we have to do is we have to take that JSON, which is a very common format on the internet, and we have to convert it to something that's readable and we can turn into the text of this Chuck label. So we're going to stop running the project now. And we're going to do an if let for the response because it isn't optional. So, you want to wrap the optional in an if let or a guard let whenever you use one. If you're not familiar with optionals, another important Swift thing that makes Swift a lot safer. It's one of the things I really like about it. So we're going to put the if let here. And for now, let's just print the response. So we're going to say JSON and then chuck response. So let's just see what that looks like. Let's build and run. So look down here in the printed statement, and it's going to show URL, ID, and value. So see the actual quote is in value, and there's only one label, or one level, I'm sorry. Every time you're in JSON is like stacked, so you'll have like, say this categories, you can go into categories, that's a separate thing, but if they have like categories, like, physical humor, space-related humor, I don't know, just making this up, but then there would be more like trees, so to say. But this one, we go straight in, and the value is all we need. So this is where SwiftyJSON comes in. And again, we're going to stop the process. Let's make that go away. And now, in here, we're going to let our chuck JSON. It is a JSON object, and this object comes from SwiftyJSON. So if you don't see that, just Command B, build it. Make sure everything's right with the package the framework that you installed. Now, it's going to be a JSON. It's going to contain the chuck response. So now that we have that, we want to say self, because we're in a closure. You have to use self. Chuck label.text equals chuck JSON, and we're going to do something that's unfamiliar here. We're going to put these brackets up, and we're going to say value, like in the what was down in the with the debugger view earlier. So see, and it says right here, rightly so, cannot assign type JSON to type string. So it's looking for a string here. So what we need to do is we need to turn it into a string, and you can just do dot string value, and that'll make that happen. So let me explain how to use SwiftyJSON if you're using a different HTTP request. If it is tiered, if there's the JSON you see has categories, or like IDs, and you need to pick one, you're going to go into, say, like if it's categories, you want to create one before, and this is just the syntax for SwiftyJSON, which you can also read about in their documentation. So you would say categories value, and that's all you need to do for SwiftyJSON. It knows to go into categories and then go into value. But we only need value for this. Just wanted to, that's a important point here. So just wanted to point that out. And it's a thing that makes SwiftyJSON superior to JSON serialization that's built in to Xcode. So we also want to be able to display to the user when it doesn't work. So we're going to say self.chucklabel.text equals Alamofire issues. Okay, now I'm going to build and run. And get quote. Yeah, that one's too long. December 1st, 2013 will be the day Chuck Norris gets a PlayStation 5. Great one right there, especially in 2019, where there's no PlayStation 5s still. Chuck Norris won the '84 Tour de France on a tricycle backwards with no wheels. Chuck Norris killed Santa Claus for trespassing. And as you can see, and because we're still printing the JSON, you can see for each value, every time we do it, it shows up here. So way to go. That one's arguably harder than the one we're going to do next. So you know, if you made it through this one, the next one should be pretty easy. This one is posting to a web server. So we're going to scroll down to the Pastebin button pressed, and we're going to get started on that. All right, so let's go back into Pastebin's page. And if we go to API, so here's your key again, creating a new paste. VR API is very easy. They're not kidding, it is. You simply have to send a valid post request to the URL shown below. So instead of get, we're going to use post. And so here's the URL. Let's go ahead and create a constant for URL. And let's create a constant for API key. And we're going to go back in here. I'm going to take this, copy, paste. And there we go. Before we go any further, let's check out what they require from us. Below is a PHP example using curl. So you can kind of get things out of this, like what you're going to need. So here would be the key. Wow, that's my key too. Damn it. They just show you guys everything. I'm going to have to blur a lot of stuff out when I edit this. Let's just scroll down a little bit and see what we need. So it says required parameters, not headers this time. We're going to use parameters. And the following are required is API dev key, API option, which we're going to set as paste, and I will show you. That's pretty simple. And API paste code is the text that will be written inside your paste. So whatever's really written in the in that text field that we created, or that I created, that's in the whatever boilerplate code. And so let's go in. Let's take these. We want to copy and paste these as a parameter. Let params equal, and in here we're going to now we want to, because it's a string, just like the last one. So we're going to say API dev key, and for that one it's actually going to be the API key that we already created a constant for. And then if we go back in here, it's going to say API option. And this option is just going to be paste. That's all we need to put for that. And then last but not least is paste code. And that is going to be our text, Pastebin text field dot text. And since it's an optional, let's create a default value using the 2 question marks. Say no input detected in text field. Perfect. So now let's get into the Alamofire request. Dot request URL. The method this time. See all the options we have. We're going to say post for this. These are the 2 most common, so that's why I'm going through these. Parameters are params instead of using headers. Encoding, I'm not going to do that right now. And so that's all we need. And so this response, if you look at possible good API responses, would be the link to your Pastebin post. So it's going to be in a string format. So we're going to say response string. And that also has a completion handler. So we're going to hit enter, and it's going to be called response. And in that response, we want to do the same thing where if response.result.is success, I want to print find your pasted result at, and then here's the link, response. And we got to do an else that handles the error. Print Pastebin post issues. There we go. So yeah, that's it. Let's build and run. See how this works. Going to say hello world, post above text to Pastebin at success. So here is the code and a copy. Go in here, paste it. There it is. Hello world. Perfect. So yeah, that was an overview of how the easiest way to do HTTP GET and POST requests using Alamofire and SwiftyJSON. Currently working on another video doing URL session and JSON serialization. And I'll also make another video comparing the two. Just, that's not a technical one, not a tutorial. Just comparing the two and why you would use one versus the other. My reasons for Alamofire is because it's all the error handling, everything is built in, and it doesn't take up that much space, and it's a very well maintained third-party library, which is important. If you're putting third-party libraries in an app, you want it to be something that is taken care of and maintained, because that is always a worry that it's going to be deprecated and no one's going to pay attention to it. But yeah, I'll get into more detail in my other video. I hope this has been useful to you. If it has, throw me a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos. And yeah, take it easy.